Welcome to Stories from Site, the podcast for renovation enthusiasts. I'm Amy Donalik, and together with my co-host Jane Middlehurst, we chat with home renovators about the rollercoaster that is renovation. This week we hear Anna's inspiring story of renovating her childhood home into her own modern family space. Balancing the preservation of her father's architectural features with sleek contemporary updates, Anna faced contractor challenges and learned to trust her instincts. Tune in to explore her journey of heritage, design, and lessons learned along the way. So welcome to Stories from Site, Anna. Great to have you with us. I feel like we've been on this journey with you to some degree, and I think it starts back in 2020. Do you want to describe your renovation?
Yeah, the renovation was a project that we'd had in mind for 10, 15 years, more than that. So we live in my old family home. I was born there essentially. So I've lived there from beginning to now for about 43 years.
Wow.
And me and my partner moved in probably about 15, 20 years ago together properly and happily lived in the house. It's a really unusual house. It's a very special building to us. It wasn't until we had a family that we realised that actually the house probably wasn't working in the way that it could for us. And we had this ambition to do a modest extension and convert the garage, but it took years for various different reasons.
Amazing. And I think it would be good to know the background of the house because your dad designed it. Is that right?
Yeah. So my dad's an architect, and just as he was, I suppose, starting his architectural career, bought the house from the council in a sort of derelict state for a very small amount of money. I mean, it was that time when you could walk past a building that was derelict and contact them, and they sold it to him. So it's an unusual building. It's a sort of Yorkshire stone barn, essentially. It was the stables for the sort of mansion house that has been long demolished, and they built sheltered housing on that. So my house, the barn, and the coach house opposite were what remained. So Dad bought it in the late 70s with my mum and set about a near 30-year renovation himself on the property by hand. So there's lots of pictures of me as a baby, just surrounded by, just in a building site, basically. No stairs, ladders. I mean, I think they kind of were a bit more realistic about what their budget was, and they just did it over time. But it is a really unusual and beautiful property that sort of designed in the late 70s, early 80s. You know, I grew up with the Terence Conran home book on the shelf, and my dad would hate me to say this, but it sort of felt like of that time. And so there's lots of detail in the house that, you know, we've got quarry slate tiles on the kitchen surface and open plan windows into rooms. It's just really unusual. And I think he really informed my sense of design too. So I was quite inspired by Dad's vision. I mean, he's moved in a really modernist way, and I'm sort of still holding on to the kind of design of the time, let's say. Yeah.
Yeah. So how has that been? Have you felt like you had a kind of responsibility, I guess is the word, to carry that torch in terms of design? How did that feel?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think I felt the pressure myself. We did things like we first did the kitchen, and I maintained the original tiles on the surfaces and the brickwork in between the kitchen units. Dad was just like, why don't you just rip it out and start again and put a really new modern kitchen in? So I was sort of at pains to retain a lot of the original detail that I remember as a child and things that felt special to me. And also include elements of that design in the new parts of the building. So it sort of all felt unified and a kind of nod to the original building and that original design concept whilst trying to modernize it. So it is a sort of, it's not a retro pastiche of the building. It's just incorporating elements of Dad's original design.
Amazing. Tell us about how you set about making the project happen. Who were your architects? Did you go back to your dad?
Yeah,
I know there's a story.
there is a whole story. And I won't bore you with all of the details, but essentially, Dad is and was a practicing architect and has been very busy with various different things, running his own company, and also has his own house that he needs to finish. And that's been a long labor of love. So originally I had thought, well, I'll employ some architects directly and we'll work together on it, because I know that if I'd have asked Dad, then, it would have taken quite a while. But also I really wanted him to finish the projects that were important to him in his life too. So we sort of went down a route with another architectural firm, and, they worked really hard and they came up with some really interesting concepts, but they got some of those concepts costed out and they were just ridiculously, like 3 times our budget. And I think they wanted to have a design ambition for us, because I'd been really specific about what I was looking to do. And I think potentially a bit unrealistic. And when the designs came back, it just didn't feel part of the house. It felt like a different add-on to it, and great design, but it didn't have the DNA baked in that I wanted it to. So I sort of went cap in hand to my dad and said, this hasn't quite worked out. Would you do it for us? And he did. The designs took longer to get. That's why we first spoke in 2020, and now we've only just finished the house. But I'm so glad we did, because it was a family project that we needed to complete together. It would have felt wrong to do it with someone else.
How did that process go with your dad? Was he quite receptive to your ideas? Because, that's got to be a bit tricky, I reckon.
I have a huge amount of respect for my dad, and he is the expert. So, often it's quite hard to challenge some of those ideas. And we're not misaligned on what we thought we wanted to do, but Dad obviously understands the building process and how things will be built and what will cost money and what is a cheaper way of doing things. Because we had a very tight budget. Dad's really good at finding efficient and affordable ways to build, which can be quite unusual, I think, for contractors, because it's not just sort of bricks and mortar. He designs things with lightweight steel mechanisms and cladding. And so ultimately the build was a lot cheaper, but he had the knowledge and understanding of how things were going to come together. So I could bring my design to it, but Dad knew the process, the build process. So it wasn't helpful if I changed my mind at a later stage or wanted to do something different, because he'd got a very clear idea of how things were going to be done. But no, it was good. And in the end, I was so grateful, because the build didn't go to plan and it got tricky with the contractor. And it was just really good to have Dad on our side. So, but like I say, I think the only sticking point ever with my dad was that I think he thought we were being a bit too sensitive to the building, a bit too wanting to kind of maintain little details of the house. My dad had some tile detail on the floor in the original building that I really, really remember. It's sort of a place where it separates the junction between carpets, and Dad had done a tile design detail. And I insisted that I wanted to keep that tile design detail, even though we were putting wooden floors in and stuff like that. Just small details that I really remember. And I think Dad at points thought I was being a little bit too over the top about preserving that. He was less emotionally connected than I was.
Wow, that's interesting.
That's so funny, because to him, it was just a thought and a thing that he did in the moment. Totally, yeah. For you, it means something totally different. But I think what makes the house special is all of those little thoughts.
Yeah.
All of those opportunities to create light from one room to another, the sort of tile detail in the kitchen continuing into the lounge area. It feels like a really unified building, even though it's quite unusual and downstairs is quite modern and upstairs is much more barn-like. It felt like one whole building, and that was important for me to keep, essentially.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Love it. Do you want to tell us what happened on site then? Or you say it was tricky, what unfolded?
I think initially, my dad and I had different ideas about how we were going to tackle the build. I think because Dad has so much knowledge about the building process, he was keen that we ran it and subcontracted. And I was of the opinion that it had taken so long to get to a point where we'd got the designs and the money in place to do it. I wanted to get a contractor because in my mind, that would be quicker and easier and less labor intensive because, you know, Dad is also a very practical person and will sort of involve himself in the actual business of building. And I didn't really want to have him do that. You know, he's got other things to be doing. So we got a contractor and I just should have listened to my gut feeling. I found the contractor on Instagram, as you do. He'd done a lot of residential properties in and around the area. And I think I was mainly swayed by the fact that he'd done sort of semi-modern design. You know, our house is in Leeds and we don't necessarily have the benefit of lots of contractors who worked on really modern type buildings. So, you know, I was convinced that I had to find a contractor that sort of had a design aspiration that I liked, but they had mixed reviews when I spoke to people, but they were available in the time frame. You know, once we had the design and the schedules, I wanted to move really, really quickly. And there weren't many builders available to start straight away, apart from this contractor. And so despite having a few mixed reviews when I'd spoken to people on projects that he'd worked on previously, I was determined to push through on the basis that, well, we had quite a lot of knowledge about the building work and I should have listened to that gut feeling, which was this probably isn't the right fit for us. But, you know, my dad had suggested working with a different contractor that he'd worked with previously, but they were more traditional and also weren't available to start straight away. And of course, I went with the cheapest quote. Maybe there's a lesson in that somewhere. So things started on time. All the big demolition work started quickly. Immediately after that, things slowed up. We were in the depths of winter and also I was off on maternity leave. So I had a very young baby with me and just didn't move at pace. And you very quickly get an idea that this contractor, who's probably a sort of small to medium sized contractor, is suddenly working 10, 13 other jobs and moving their team around. And, you know, it went from something we were told would take about 3 months to a lot longer than that. So fairly quickly we knew it wasn't going to plan and some of the work that had been done was really not great. And even I could see as a non-expert that, you know, there'd not been much care and attention placed on it. And that's a real problem when, for us, the house we're so emotionally connected to the house and so much care and attention had been paid to it previously that it was really hard to watch that process unfold. And I think, you know, because Dad was obviously on site quite a lot and could see the things that were happening. Maybe if you didn't have that architectural support or the sort of expert support, people you might not know better. So you would just accept that that was the way it was done and not challenge. And then obviously when you do start challenging, that relationship changes quite quickly. It can go from very amiable and amicable to quite difficult. And obviously I'm in the house all the time with the baby. It just, wasn't a good time, I've got to say.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. And also just sort of thinking about your gut feelings is the sort of payment schedule that he proposed was something that Dad didn't feel very comfortable with. And he told me that, but I was really insistent that I wanted to move forward. And so in this way, you know, you make a lot of big payments at the very beginning and you don't necessarily have a lot to show for it, which was really disconcerting. It was quite disorganized. Parts of the house were done and other parts weren't, but you were paying that full first fix invoice when only half of the first fix had been done. It was, listen, you know, he's very successful and has done lots of home renovations. I just think it just was not a good match between us. We really wanted high quality. I'd expected to see things move quicker than it did.
Yeah. And why do you think that was? Just the sheer volume of work he had?
Yeah, totally. And also, and his team was saying the same thing to me. I knew that was the case. And I think that they felt a frustration on every job that they did, is that they didn't just go in and complete a job.
Yeah.
They'd go for 2 days and they'd be moved on to something else. And you couldn't really get your head down and do the work. So I felt the frustration from them too. But also, and I know this from people that had sort of warned me before the build, that the schedule of works had not been looked at thoroughly, and things we had specified hadn't been looked at. So the wrong things were turning up on site, or not turning when the people came to do the job. There was none of this stuff ordered. So it was just a really inefficient way of doing it. When you've got a young baby and a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old at the time, it's important that it is efficient and moving forward.
So did you part ways with him?
Yeah, we parted ways. We were doing sort of regular site meetings and would agree a list of things that would be done. And in some shape or form, they were done, but not necessarily completed. And there was just a lot of, well, I'm waiting for this. That's why we're not doing that. And it just it was untenable. There was no way we could have continued. I decided that I wasn't going to make some of the payments for completed work because it hadn't been completed. And so once you get into a money conversation, I think that I think both of us decided to go our separate ways, to be fair. Like, we knew it wasn't something we wanted to continue with. I think he felt like the job was more trouble than it was worth, because we were obviously a very invested party. So yeah, I think he decided to go his separate ways at the same time. And I think honestly, it was the best thing that could have happened to us, because we then, and even though it took a lot longer, we then started working with subcontractors, either who we've had relationship, that we'd worked with previously before, or people who'd been recommended by trades that we really trusted. And we just had a brilliant team of people who could come in, and like, our tiling in our bathroom is something to behold. It's just so beautiful. And the guy who did it was recommended by our joiner, who we've worked with for years and years and years. And the electrician came through our joiner as well. And they're all just really decent, great guys who were really good at their jobs. And it was just much better.
How far through you when that happened, when you split?
So it was probably first fix electrics that we went our separate ways. There'd been some plastering done in the spare room, but the sort of extension area hadn't been plastered. So part of the plumbing had been done, but the underfloor heating hadn't been connected. So it's quite a big thing to me to go our separate ways, because there were lots of half-done jobs that someone else then had to pick up, like the electrician had to pick up halfway through, and so did the plumbers. And that wasn't straightforward. But we got there and everything worked out in the end. Yeah. So there was a lot of work to do with subcontractors. And it was people work, if you're good, you're not available straight away. So there was a lot of waiting around.
And do you look back and are you kind of glad that you went with the guy and he got you through to first fix, or do you wish that you had done the subcontracting?
No, I wish we'd done subcontractors from the beginning. I think we were so lucky that I've got someone in the family who's an expert, and I probably should have just had the confidence to go with that and know that I've got the support. And also that I was off on mat leave at the time. So, it became a full-time job, whether it was with a contractor or whether it was with subcontractors anyway, because I was having to make lists of all the things that hadn't been done, all the snagging lists all the way. And I was doing all of the ordering. A lot of the stuff, it wasn't off the shelf that we wanted. So I'd already ordered, and with the Excel spreadsheet of the budget that you guys had, I'd already been through that before the build had started and specified things and started buying things. So yeah, I wish I'd have been a bit braver.
It's hard, isn't it? Because at that moment, you weighed up the situation. Like, it's a
Yeah.
shame that the contractor didn't turn out to be a great fit, because I don't think necessarily you made the wrong. I don't know. It's easy to see it in hindsight.
In
isn't
hindsight,
it? But,
I think
yeah.
I only ever wanted it done as quickly as possible. We'd waited a long time. And I suppose I worried that if we subcontracted, Dad would be doing drawings at different stages. But I thought if we have a contractor, everything's going to be finished.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's never like that anyway, because things crop up and you need to do detailed designs of a specific element. So I hadn't quite appreciated it, I don't think. But yeah, I suppose we made the decision.
The thought process wasn't a bad one. You're right on both counts, like both sides are true. It would have been nice to have somebody come in and work with you, but hold the project together, but be working collaboratively with you.
Yeah.
And with a baby in tow, it's not the obvious choice, is it? To be like, right, I'll be project manager.
Well, we were supposed to have done the build before I had the baby. That was the ultimate goal, but it just didn't happen. I don't spend a long time thinking about that and regretting it. We've got a brilliant, amazing house that works perfectly for us now, and it is a bit like childbirth. I know that's like, something that people compare building work to all the time, but you sort of don't always remember the pain of it once you're finally there. It's a lesson for next time, and it's a lesson to listen to your gut. We live and learn, don't we? And we were probably also quite demanding as clients. We wanted things right. We wanted things very particular way. I'd spent so many years thinking about this that it had to be what we wanted it to be. I didn't want shortcuts. I didn't want a cheaper scenario. I wanted it to be as we'd imagined and hoped. So, don't want to be unfair to the contractor, but,
potentially he'd not really understood that and not properly looked at the drawings. He thought he was coming in to do something different, which was, I'll come in, do what I do, get out.
Yeah.
It sounds like he was in a less than perfect scenario anyway, but it wasn't what he was expecting.
I think he'd done a cookie cutter approach to his previous projects and not really looked at the detail of it.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think also if you had bought that house and there was no family history to it, I think the decision you made might have been different. That history and connection and the emotion did lead you to be very specific and the project to be quite bespoke.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. You then have to match that up either with the architect who understands that kind of, that's not an easy thing to do design wise, to come into something else that's been designed by someone and keep the, like you say, the DNA, but also push it on to the future. That's not a cookie cutter type design. And the same with the builder. It's like actually you needed someone so specific. But I can imagine from your side, it's like you have a limited budget. You want it done in a certain time. Like you're trying to push those two things.
There's lots of things there's lots of things to balance there. I think that just going down the subcontractor route would probably have given us more control. So I know that I know that the design we had in mind was achievable. It wasn't a totally unrealistic project at all. It's just that doing it through the subcontracted route meant we had much more control. That's probably why it was better for us, because the small details really matter on this.
Yeah, absolutely. How is it now living there?
It's great. I mean, it's just wonderful. We're still finishing off the cladding on the outside, but from the inside out, it's finished.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's really everything that we wanted it to be and has enhanced our sort of family life together. Our house was an upside down house. So the main lounge is upstairs on the first floor with the rest of the bedrooms. And this build has meant that we could have a more open plan dining lounge area all on the ground floor. So, the children are young and being able to keep an eye on them and they can play around while we're getting dinner ready. Whereas previously we just had a dining room downstairs. It was a really small, quite dark space. So we've got huge glass windows now, which just let in so much light. It's lovely. We're really proud of it.
And how about your dad? What does your dad think?
Well, I think Dad likes it. I mean, Dad doesn't ever go over the top on praise.
Yeah.
But no, I think he's really pleased. I mean, he's pleased we're pleased. I think that's what he would say, as long as it's what we wanted. And it definitely is. And now we keep having these conversations about what next we would do. So I'm going to keep that quiet for a bit. I don't think my dad could take hearing that we want to put a dormer on the top of the house. We'll leave that for the next phase. But
now
really
you'll be going separate trades and managing the dormer yourself. Yeah. And waiting for him to come up with a design.
Yeah. Well, we may as well plant the seed now. So in 10 years' time, when we get ready to. Yeah.
We've both had conversations with you as you've progressed. And obviously some of those were in some tricky times for you trying to get through the process. So it's so nice now to chat to you when it's all finished and done. And it's just been such an interesting project to follow. I mean, it's got so many interesting aspects to it.
You know, I could bore on about design and renovation for hours and hours and hours. So it's quite nice to be able to have a process to just sort of like talk about it. But it's funny because the documents that I got from you initially became a sort of work in progress through the build. And it also saved me a lot of money because, you know, I started buying Vola taps on eBay, 3 or 4 years before we actually got to the build. So it meant that when the build finally did happen, like I had everything, it wasn't
amazing.
like a knee-jerk reaction to like a decision that needed to be made. It was all there. It had all been ordered, to the particular toilet that I wanted and sink. And it was just, I don't think if I hadn't have had that, I would be much more reactionary to things and perhaps would have put stuff in the house that we weren't happy with. But I think what's worked so well is that there isn't a detail in the house that I look at and think, oh, I'm going to change that tap when we've got more money or when we've got this, and I think that's how I like to think of the house that Dad designed, is that he really took his time when he was doing the house and that everything that he put in was thought about. And that's how I wanted our house to be. I wanted it to have longevity because the house still looks modern 40 years on.
Yeah, I love it. That's so nice. I love it.